This is the story of a young choir boy who lived in Vienna over 200 years ago and grew up to be known as the founder of the modern symphony. This is the wonderful story of the life and the music of an extraordinary man, Joseph Haydn. To begin our story of this great composer, I'm going to tell you how Joseph Haydn lived as a boy, so that you can see what he saw and understand how he felt. The Cathedral of St. Stephen, the landmark of Vienna, an inspiring church still standing today. It has beautiful stained glass windows, stone rain gutters carved out in the shape of dragons. These are called gargoyles, statues all around. If you could stand at the top of the cathedral, 400 feet high, you could see the foothills of the Alps and the Austrian forests. It seemed as though all the world led to St. Stephen's. And next door is where Joseph Haydn lived with 5 other choir boys. For 9 years, Joseph worked and slept in the shadow of St. Stephen's and sang to his heart's content, for that's what he wanted most to do. Yes, Joseph had plenty of music to sing, but very little to eat. The choir master responsible for the boys was a stingy man indeed. Many a time little Joseph went to bed without any supper. However, one day Joseph found out he didn't always have to be hungry. Whenever the choir gave private concerts in the houses of Viennese nobility, refreshments were served. Well, I don't have to tell you that young Joseph worked very hard to be the best choir boy of St. Stephen's, so that he would always be invited to sing at a place where he could eat. It's one thing to be starved for food, but Haydn was also starved for music lessons. As a boy, he never had the proper teachers. He learned by doing, studied by singing and by playing instruments, and later by composing. He was always listening to music, drinking it in. And in Vienna in those days, the finest music was always being played somewhere. But this wasn't enough to satisfy Haydn. After all, he was a healthy, growing boy who loved games and jokes. The Empress, Maria Theresa, who later on was to play an important part in the composer's life, loved Joseph for his singing, but sometimes got very angry at his pranks. The last straw was the day Haydn cut off the pigtail of a wig worn by the singer who sat in front of him at choir practice. Yes, he was expelled. It was a bitter, cold winter day when Haydn left St. Stephen's. Into the streets he had to go, carrying his only possessions, 3 shirts and 2 books on harmony. Friends took him in, and he lived with a poor family in a garret. Oh, he tried to make a living. He played at dances, taught music, and composed serenades for the famous Viennese open-air musicales. It is 1759. We're in Lukowek outside Vienna. It's summer, and at the house of Count von Mortzen, Joseph Haydn is conducting a symphony he's just composed. In the audience, listening as we are now, is a great patron of the arts, Prince Paul Anton Esterhazy. The following year, Haydn got married. Unfortunately, it wasn't until after his marriage that he found out his wife, Maria Anna, just didn't like music. In fact, the story goes that she would use her husband's manuscripts to line her pastry tins, or his scores as curl papers. 1 year later, Prince Paul Esterhazy made himself immortal in musical history by engaging Haydn as assistant conductor of the Esterhazy Orchestra. Now, that family, the oldest and wealthiest of the country, long had the reputation for promoting the arts and music. And it was during the many years that Joseph Haydn was with the Esterhazys that he composed some of his finest works. This sonata, written the year that America declared her independence, 1776, is a good example not only of Haydn's musicianship, but his sense of humor. The guests of the prince loved to watch Haydn conduct the orchestra. His face was so expressive that it was closely watched by the snobs of society who wanted to show how well they understood music. When Haydn frowned, so would they. When he smiled, they would laugh and burst into ecstatic applause. It was indeed a great day when Papa Haydn became completely responsible for the musical direction. Perhaps it was to show off his own great talents that Haydn composed and conducted his great organ mass in E-flat major. This is part of it. The Empress herself, Maria Theresa, once said, "If I want to enjoy a good opera, I go to Esterházy." Picture a royal weekend at Esterházy, the summer residence of the prince. The Empress and her retinue escorted in 15 magnificent carriages through the prince's park. In the evening, music by Haydn, followed by a masked ball in the castle, the mirror-covered walls reflecting the lights of the beautiful crystal chandeliers. The next day, after a banquet, the Empress would stroll along a path lined with wild chestnut trees to the magnificent private opera house, where every day Haydn conducted an opera for the prince and hundreds of guests, retainers, or passers-by. But on this particular day, the Empress walked across the path from the opera house to Esterházy's private marionette theater. Here, beautifully made puppets would act out plays and even operas. And today, it was a new opera by Kapellmeister Joseph Haydn himself, Philemon and Baucis. Although Haydn and his family were well taken care of and lived comfortably, this was not true of the musicians and the servants who made up the court of the prince. They worked hard with little chance to see their families. So Haydn decided to help his friends out. He wrote his Farewell Symphony. In it, each musician finishes by blowing out the candle that lights his music, gets up, and leaves the room. Well, the prince immediately understood the meaning of this little pantomime, and the next day gave the order for all to take a vacation from Esterházy. Two things happened in 1781 which were important in Haydn's life. One, he met Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Although Mozart was about half Haydn's age, this didn't prevent them from becoming fast friends. And whenever Haydn visited Vienna, he would play chamber music with his young composer friend. In fact, Mozart always said that he had learned how to write string quartets from Haydn. Also in 1781, Haydn's Stabat Mater was performed in Paris 4 times. Now, as you listen to this composition, remember that it was written by Haydn at a time when he was trying out new tonal sounds, new musical effects. He scored this great work for a tiny orchestra because he felt it was the best way to convey the intimate character of the music. 26 voices in Stabat Mater. Haydn was very versatile. There was hardly any musical form he couldn't or didn't write. Already we've heard portions of a puppet opera, an organ mass, sacred instrumental music, and a few symphonies. And our story of the music by Joseph Haydn has hardly begun. Haydn was almost 60 when his life took a new direction. To England. That was Haydn's decision. His friends warned him against the long journey, to say nothing of the new life that he had decided upon. After all, Papa Haydn was nearly 60 years old. You have no education for the wide world, they said to him, and you speak so few languages. But Haydn's only answer was, my language is understood all over the world. How was the composer received in England by the English, and so warm-heartedly that Haydn said, "It is England that has made me famous in Germany." It was Johann Peter Solomon who had engaged Haydn to appear in London. For the composer, it meant not only a new way of life, but the chance to attempt greater orchestral effects than ever before. As a result, 12 of Haydn's great symphonies were performed in England and set a new standard for symphonic music. It was the beginning of the modern symphony orchestra. Hardly a year after his arrival in England, Haydn was invited to Oxford in order to receive the honorary degree of Doctor of Music. It was a great occasion, and Haydn brought a brand new symphony with him. Unfortunately, he arrived too late to rehearse it, so he had to choose a work he had written 3 years earlier. And this was forever after known as the Oxford Symphony. But don't think for a moment Haydn's London life was all work and no play. Far from it. He was wined and dined practically everywhere. In his diary, he wrote, "In the month of August, I was gloriously entertained. I went with Mr. Fraser on the Thames from Westminster Bridge to Richmond, where we had dinner on an island." Another entry in the diary describes a dinner to the new Lord Mayor of London, and yet another describes 3 days at the Duke of York's castle. Who would ever believe that the little Viennese choir boy who sang at St. Stephen's would ever become the guest of England's Prince of Wales? The same year, Haydn not only gave many benefits for fellow musicians, but 14 important concerts featuring mostly his own compositions. At one concert that February, 2 movements of his Symphony No. 96 in D were encored. The newspaper Morning Chronicle wrote the next day, "The concert was exceedingly spirited and was distinguished above all competition by the overture of the matchless Haydn." At the first performance of the Symphony in D, part of the audience pressed forward to look at Haydn at close range, leaving a vacant space in the concert room. Well, not a moment later, a chandelier crashed down on this empty spot. There were cries of, "A miracle! A miracle!" because no one was hurt by the accident. And for some time after, this composition was known as the Miracle Symphony. Perhaps the best-known symphony he ever wrote, and that because of its name rather than its music, is Haydn's Surprise Symphony. After 15 bars of music, there's a sudden crashing chord, a typical Haydn musical joke. "This will make the ladies scream," said Haydn. And if not that, at least it will wake up the audience. In the months that passed, Haydn returned to Vienna. His friend Mozart had died, and a young man by the name of Ludwig von Beethoven began studying counterpoint with Haydn. Finally, the composer returned to England to give 6 more concerts. Johann Solomon, who first brought Haydn to England, allowed the composer to write for whatever instruments he wished. When Haydn had completed his London symphonies, he was introduced to the King of England, George III, during a concert at York House. And Haydn was introduced to George III by the Prince of Wales. "Dr. Haydn," said the king, "you have written a good deal." Haydn answered, "Yes, sire, a great deal more than is good." To which the King of England replied, "Oh, no, the world contradicts that." When he was 62 years old, he decided to put behind him the excitement of life in England. For the last time, Haydn sailed the English Channel, carrying back with him a wealth of parting gifts, including a coconut goblet, a silver goblet, and a talking parrot. Below deck were his trunks, containing over 750 pages of music written during those 2 visits to England. Papa Haydn was returning home. The Creation was the name of one of the most ambitious works Haydn ever penned. Of this oratorio, the composer himself has said, "Never was I so devout as when composing the Creation. I knelt down every day and prayed to God to strengthen me for my work." Whenever Haydn felt his inspiration on the wane, he would begin to say his rosary. He never found this method to fail. There were other sources of inspiration for Haydn. In 1800, Admiral Nelson and Lady Hamilton visited the Esterhazy estate. It is said they were both quite taken with Haydn, and for 2 days Lady Hamilton did not budge from Haydn's side. After the Creation was first performed, Haydn completed the Nelson Mass, and then the Theresian Mass, probably named after the Empress Maria Theresa, who meant more to Haydn than a casual admirer. She was one of his most enthusiastic patrons. Haydn wrote many important works in his last days. Another oratorio called The Seasons, which is so fresh and inspired that one would never know how sick the composer was while writing it. Time was running out. Austria was at war again. Towards the end of May 1809, while outside Vienna bombs and shells were falling, Joseph Haydn gathered his loved ones about him and started to play the piano. Unhappy at the approaching hour and the collapse of his beloved Austria, he played his favorite, the Austrian hymn, 3 times. It was his last performance. He fainted and was carried back to bed. 24 hours passed. Doctors came and went. Haydn opened his eyes and looked at his loved ones. "Children, be comforted," he whispered. "I am well." Then, shortly after midnight on the last day of May, he passed away in his sleep. Here, indeed, was a genius. An Austrian who began life as a choir boy and ended his days setting the musical sights for the orchestral composers of the future. The founder of the modern symphony, Joseph Haydn, the man who said of his music, "My language is understood all over the world."